A gute Woche. The Rebbe soll gesund sein, began the Farbrengen this afternoon. That this Shabbos is a special Shabbos Mevorchim. Based on what the Alter Rebbe heard from the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Maggid of Mezrich in turn heard it from the Baal Shem Tov. In other words, this is something which is related to us by the three Avos HaChassidus, the fathers of Chassidus, the general Chassidus and Chassidus Chabad, meaning the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and the Alter Rebbe. The contents of the Inyan is that Shabbos Mevorchim Tishrei, which is today actually, the last Shabbos in Elul, is the Shabbos Mevorchim for Tishrei. Shabbos Mevorchim Tishrei, Yidden don't bench. Sure, we didn't say it today. However, the Rebishter benches it, and with the koyach of the Rebishter benching it, Yidden have, this gives strength to Yidden that Yidden should be able to bench the month all year round. And when the Rebishter gives a bracha, the Rebbe immediately continued, it's a bracha which should come true in Gashmias as well. Not only should it remain in Ruchnias spiritually, but it should come down in Gashmias materially, physically. And it's brought, the Alter Rebbe brings in L'Kutei Torah. In the name of the Hagoyes Maimene, the Alter Rebbe brings, it's a commentary on the Rambam, that when it comes Rosh Hashanah, we have a din in Mishpat. So the judgment of Rosh Hashanah is primarily on Inyanim Gashmi, and Gashmistic things. The Rebbe says we find the same in other, Rebbe's drawing parallels, where we find throughout Torah that the main Inyan is Gashmias. And once there is a bracha in Gashmias, this already affects the Ruchnias as well. Where do we find it in Gashmias? We find regarding Tefillin. And Tefillin is a general mitzvah. As Chazal tell us, Huksha kol ha-Torah kula l'Tefillin, the entire Torah is compared to Tefillin. In Tefillin we know that when one puts on Tefillin, he's supposed to have kavanas, intense thoughts. And this is not something additional to the mitzvah. It's something which on one hand it's part of the mitzvah. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch that when we put on Tefillin, we put on the Tefillin on our hand and we put on the Tefillin on our head. This expresses that we dedicate our minds and our hearts to the Rebbeinu Shalom, to Hashem. However, if one will put on Tefillin and will lack these kavanas, he wouldn't have these thoughts, then his putting on Tefillin is okay. On the other hand, should he have these thoughts only and not have the Tefillin, not perform the mitzvah begashmis by putting on the Tefillin, then he's lacking the fulfillment of the mitzvah. So what do we see from this again? That the main thing is how the Inyan sets in Gashmias. And the way it's... And the Gashmias also has a shaykhis, is also tied in with the Ruchnias. So when we're talking about this Shabbos giving bracha for this month, and with the strength of the Rebbe, this gives us strength that we should be able to bless every incoming month throughout the entire year. We are simply referring to brachas begashmias. That the Rebbe should give a bracha, that we should have a happy and healthy year. It should be a year of hatzlacha in all of whatever we need. And together with it, it should also be a year of hatzlacha in the avodas hatshuva, which we have to prepare before Rosh Hashanah. This is the Inyan of tshuva. And together with it, also an Inyan of, the Rebbe expressed himself, it should be a hatzlacha, a success, to the fact that it should be a year of Geula, that we should be redeemed out of Golus. And therefore we can understand that this is a special Shabbos, and a Shabbos when we are to make proper decisions, and the decisions that are made on this Shabbos should be brought down into reality, into Maisa, which ha-Maisa huwa Yikar. Then the Rebbe continued, this is the Shabbos that the Rebishter benches, as we just mentioned, this month. And this gives strength that Yidden should be able to bench every month during the entire year. So actually, this is a bracha not only for this month, the bracha which the Rebishter is giving, this bracha really affects the entire year. Because we just said that it is with the strength of this bracha that Yidden can bench the Chodesh every month. So this bracha which we are getting today from the Rebishter, how the Rebishter is benching this month, gives a bracha into the entire year. Memela. Especially we are on such Shabbos, and we are already past Chai Elul. For Chai Elul we know is the day that gives Chayis, that gives life into the Avodah of Elul. And we are about to come close to Rosh Hashanah. We're a few days before Rosh Hashanah. So it's definite that these are the proper days when everyone should make a proper cheshbon nefesh, should do a proper evaluation on himself, how we are all standing as far as all three areas of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasod. And as mentioned in previous Shabbosim and in previous Siches, that there are abbreviations of Elul for the word of Elul that are linking to each one of these three pillars of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasod. Memela, it is a proper time that now we should utilize these days to every one of us to make a proper evaluation upon ourselves. What we have not done, what we have been missing throughout the entire year, a detailed cheshbon, a detailed accounting in each one of these areas, in the area of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasodim, and see to it that all of this is rectified properly. And then, first we make a detailed evaluation, and then to make a more of a general evaluation, whereby we will sum up how each and every one of us, what we have to do so that we can prepare ourselves properly for the oncoming year, for the year of Rosh Hashanah, which begins with Rosh Hashanah. Talking about this inyan, that they are inyanim, how they are in detail, and they are inyanim, how they come down later into a general rule, into a klal. There is prat and klal, detailed, and then when it comes down to a general total. It says that today's date is Chav Hei Elul, 25 days in the month of Elul. What is 25 days in the month of Elul? This is the day when the Rebishter created the world. If we refer to the Mamor in Chassidus, there's a very famous question. We say, Zeh hayoim tchilas masecha. This is the day, the beginning of your creation. And what day does this refer to? This refers to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah actually is the 6th day of creation. Rosh Hashanah is the day when man was created. However, when was the beginning of creation? When the Rebishter began, what we learn in Chumash, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, that the Rebishter created the world. And the Chassidus teaches us that the world was created yesh me'ayin. A substance was created me'ayin, from nothing. When did this happen? This happened on the first day of creation. The Ramban in Chumash tells us that the B'rias yesh me'ayin, this transpired on the first day. Further days, it was no longer yesh me'ayin. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Bereishis bara Elokim," and this first day Hashem created, Eis hashamayim ve'eis ha'aretz, the earth and heaven. So Chazal interpret that the pasuk says Eis hashamayim and Eis ha'aretz. So the additional S comes to tell us Shamayim larabis kol tzva'ah v'ha'aretz larabis kol tzva'ah, that everything was already created in a general format on the first day. It is only later that it was revealed into details throughout the later days of creation. But the question still remains, why do we say that the Tchilas Ma'asecha, Zeh Hayom Tchilas Ma'asecha, refers to the day of Rosh Hashanah, at the time that the day of Rosh Hashanah is really the 6th day of creation, and not the first? Which this is a very famous question which is discussed in many Ma'amorim Chassidus. And there's an answer to this question. And the answer, what Chassidus answers, true that the beginning of creation was on the 25th day in Elul and not at the first day of Rosh Hashanah. However, what was the goal of creation? What did the Rebishter, why? The entire world, why was it created? So that it should come to the creation of man on the sixth day. So, Lepoyel, in other words, in actuality, when did the Rebbe begin creating the world? He began creating the world today on the 25th day of Elul. However, what was the goal of him creating the world? So that man should be created, so that Adam should be created. And what was the goal of creating Adam? So we find it right away in the word Adam. We don't have to go far. Adam means a man in Hebrew. However, Adam also means Adama le'elyon. He is similar, Adama, compared le'elyon to the one above, to his creator, to his master. In other words, what is the whole inyan of creating Adam HaRishon? Creating Adam HaRishon is what Adam did on the first day of his creation. What did he do? On the very first day that he was created, he immediately proclaimed, Bayu nishtachave v'nichra lifnei Hashem Eseinu. He called everyone, all the animals and all the birds and everything which was already created by the Rebbe until then. He called them all, let us all go and bow to our master. What is the inyan of bowing to our master? What is the inyan of ishtachavah, of bowing? The inyan of ishtachavah, this is an expression of bittul, an expression of giveaway. In other words, he's giving himself totally away to whom? To the one that created him. If we were to use Chassidish expression, the Rebbe says this is the expression how within every person that is created, there's the spark of his Yechida Shebenefesh, the level of Yechida Shebenefesh. This Yechida comes from the Yochid, from the one and only who, meaning the Rabbeinu Shalom. And this is the combination of the Nitzutz Nivra and the Nitzutz Beire, of the spark of the one who was created and the spark of the Creator, how these two are united, and this is within another, within a person. So what is the whole goal of creating a person? The whole goal of creating a person is that he should reflect and live up to the inyan that he has within him of being an Adam Elyon compared to his master, and therefore as a result of that serve his master in a format of Bayu Nishtacha V'Nichra, let us all come and bow Lifnei Hashem Eseinu, before Hashem who created us. So again, we have the world, how the world was created in its klal, in general, and this was tak on the first day. However, when do we come to pratim, to details, until we finally come to the ultimate goal of the creation of the world? This is what happened on the Yom HaShishi by the creation of Adam. The same the Rebbe says, we have more particular in the year which we are in right now. We are right now in a year completing a Shemitah year. And from the Shemitah year, we are entering a year of Hakel. What is the inyan of a year of Shemitah? It's a sabbatical year, when Yidden in Eretz Yisrael were prohibited to work, and were not allowed to do any type of field work. Memela, what did they do if they didn't do field work? They weren't involved with the weeds that grew, and with the trees, and with their vineyards, and so forth. So Memela, what were they involved in? This was a year which was set aside for the learning of Torah. So Yid had an opportunity during the year of Shemitah to devote himself more to the learning of Torah. This is what Shemitah was. What came after Shemitah? The Sukkot following Shemitah comes the inyan of Hakel. What is the idea of Hakel? Hakel, as we read in today's Sedra, the idea of Hakel is that everybody, men, women, and infants, children, everybody gathers to Yerushalayim, and the king reads certain parshiyas, certain portions of the Torah. And what is the reason for all of this? So that it brings to God-fearing. So what does this show us? This shows us that after going through the avodah of a Shemitah year, we come to Hakel, which Hakel builds us up, leads us into, to a yet higher step, to an inyan of fearing the Rebishter. And fearing the Rebishter, the Rebbe also mentioned there are various levels of fear of Hashem, as explained in Chassidus. But when we're talking about fear in a general term, it means up to the very highest level which one can have to be of being God-fearing. So it's also in the same way, it starts off with the inyan of Shemitah, and what does Shemitah lead to? Shemitah leads to Hakel, which is a yet higher madrig. The same the Rebbe says we have in our daily lives, each and every one of us. We start out our day with Moida Ani Lefanecha. What is the expression of Moida Ani Lefanecha? It's a tremendous expression, which a general thank you to the Rebishter, Shechzarta bi Nishmasi, that He's returned our souls to us. This is what we say immediately as we rise in the morning, which this is a tremendous expression of recognition to the Rebishter. However, once we go through the entire day of serving the Rebishter, what do we conclude our day with? Biyotcha afkid ruchi. This is what we say in Krishma Shalamita. Biyotcha afkid ruchi, in your hand I am putting my soul. What type of an expression is that? This is a much stronger dedication from a person to the Rebishter. That means he's putting himself away totally. He's kind of like non-existent. He is giving himself fully over to the hands of the Rebishter. Biyotcha, in your hand, afkid ruchi, I'm putting my soul. I'm giving away my soul into your hands. In other words, it's a type. What does this express? This expresses how a Yid is giving himself, dedicating himself solely to the service of the Rebishter. So it's also the same idea. We start off with Moidani. Later we come throughout the day, we achieve to the highest point of being able to dedicate ourselves to the Rebishter, and that's expressed through Biyotcha Afkid Ruchi. As customary in Farbrengen, that the Rebbe always raises questions in a Rashi, in the week Sedre, also explains in the Rambam and in the Pirkei Avos. Before the Rebbe got in to explain the Rashi today, he gave a general introduction to today's Sedre. Today's Sedre is Nitzavim Vayelech. Obviously, we look at it that it's a combination of two Sedres. We read Pashas Nitzavim and we read Pashas Vayelech. And today it's combined. Truth is that throughout the year we have a few of such Sedres. However, the Rebbe says Nitzavim Vayelech is really one Sedre. It is just that certain years this Sedre is split. Says Reb Sadi Goyen writes that. And Reb Sadi Goyen gives a siman, gives us a code to know when we split Nitzavim Vayelech and when we don't. And he expresses it as follows. Pesach, Bag, Beis Gimel, Hamelach. What does this mean? Pas means in Hebrew posris or isopitim, to break something, split something. Beis Gimel, Hamelach. Rosh Hashanah is called Hamelach. That's the day when we express the exception that we're the acceptance of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as our Melech. When Hamelech comes out on Beis and Gimel on Monday and Tuesday, that is when Pas we split Nitzavim and Vayelech. That is when Nitzavim is read before Rosh Hashanah and Vayelech is read after Rosh Hashanah. Otherwise, in all other years, Nitzavim and Vayelech comes together. So Nitzavim and Vayelech is really one Sedre. Furthermore, there's a Zohar. The Zohar tells us that they are Gan Sidrei De'araisa. Zohar uses the expression that there are 53 Sedres. And he compares it to a Gan, to a garden. He says if we were to count the Sedres, we will find that they are not 53, but they are 54. Let us begin counting from Bereishis till V'zei Sabracha, you'll find 54 Sedres. How does this correspond to what the Zohar says that there are 53? So the answer is given that Nitzavim and Vayelech is really one Sedre. It's just like in special occasion, when Rosh Hashanah comes out on a Monday and Tuesday, that the arrangement was made in such a way that Nitzavim Vayelech are split. But otherwise it's really one set. And in Pashas Vayelech, we find the mitzvah of Hakel, which we just discussed, which is going to be actually in the year which we are entering, being that this year is a Shnas HaShmita. This Sukkot is a Sukkot of Hakel, which means that after Shemitah comes a year, the 8th year, which on the Sukkot of this year, the king had a special mitzvah. The king had a mitzvah that he would have to gather everyone, men, women, and children. Hakel asam, the pasuk says, bring everyone together. Ha'anoshim, the men, va'anoshim, and the women, va'ataf, and the children, v'geilchan, the geirem asher b'sharecha, that are all in your gates, amongst you. What is the reason of this mitzvah? Laman yishmu, so that they should hear. Laman yilmedu, they should learn. V'yaru es Hashem elokechem, they should be God-fearing. V'shamru, they shall observe. Last is called divrei HaTorah. They should know to observe all of this entire thing. Then the pasuk goes on, Uvnei asher lo yodu, and the children who are not knowledgeable yet. It's wild. The pasuk just told us what we're bringing children as well. So the children who are not knowledgeable, what are they coming for? Yishmu, they will hear. V'lamdu, they will learn. Liyira es Hashem elokechem, to be God-fearing people. Kol hayamim, all their days, asher atem chayim al adama, which they will be living on the land which Almighty God has given you to inherit. What does actually the pasuk say here? Pasuk here says that the whole idea of Hakel is so that people should learn. People should become more learned and more God-fearing. As far as children don't understand what is being learned. So the child also, it will have an impact on the child. When a child comes to such an occasion where he sees everybody gathered there, and he sees that the melech gets up, the king rises, and relates various portions of the Torah. So we can imagine that when this child grows up, this will have an impact on him, the entire environment, the entire impression, the entire scenery. And later, what will this lead him to? This will also lead him to Liyiras Hashem elokechem, to be God-fearing. This is what we gather from the psukim. If we look into Rashi quotes the word v'hataf, that children also came to the Beis HaMikdash on the Sukkot when the mitzvah of Hakel was fulfilled. And Rashi asks, v'hataf, children, lama bo, why did children come? And answers, gives us a response. What is Rashi's response? Losei schar l'miviyayim, in order to reward those that are bringing the children. Pasuk tells us why the children were brought. Why does Rashi have to ask a question and give an answer without a question? There's an answer for this in the Pasuk. Pasuk tells us, not because of giving extra reward to those that brought them. Pasuk tells us that when a child comes and sees a Hakel, this leaves an eternal impression on the child, and therefore, later years, even though the child does not understand what was discussed at Hakel, still it has an effect on him that it will lead him to instill more Yirah Shemayim within the child. So Rashi asks, Lama bo, why did they come? And what does Rashi answer? Losei schar, to give schar, to reward l'miviyim, those that brought. Furthermore, what kind of a question is it, taf lama bo? When we reach here, the Chumash, we know very well that there's a mitzvah of vishinantam levanecha, of teaching children. And teaching children, this is part of the obligation of a father, that a father has to be mechanich, educate his child. And by educating his child, he also has him participate in various mitzvahs. Sees to it that the child learns Torah, and so forth. So just like we don't raise any questions regarding the obligation of vishinantam levanecha, we don't raise questions, why vishinantam levanecha? Because we know that this is part of the chinuch of the child, that he has to be taught so that later when he grows up he knows what to do. Same here, the pasuk says. The pasuk gives us a reason. Uvnei asher lo yodu, children that don't learn, they are not knowledgeable yet of learning. Nonetheless, this will have an effect on them as they grow up. Liyiras Hashem elokechem. So why does Rashi get involved raising the question why the children come, and gives an answer, to reward those that brought. Rebbe is learning that there are two parts in the mitzvah of Hakel. There are the people that come. Then there's a mitzvah on the king, that the king should gather everyone to come. When the Torah tells us, Hakel esa'am, who is obligated to Hakel esa'am, to see to it that to call everybody to participate? This is a mitzvah on the melech. It's a mitzvah on the king. The king was supposed to read various portions of the Torah on Sukkot when this took place. And Mamela, it was his mitzvah and his obligation to see to it that everyone gathers. So when he is calling everyone to take part, so he's calling men, Lilmoit, men learn. Nashim, what are the women coming for? Lishmoya, they are coming to hear. What are children coming for? What are Taf coming for? Lama Bo, why are they coming? Lasei Schar Lemiviyayim, to give a reward to those that bring them. In other words, this is something additional. There is the inyan, what it automatically has an impact on the child, that the child comes. And definitely, this is what the Pasuk tells us. When a child sees a scene like Hakel, no question about it, a child sees how all of Klal Yisrael, the entire Jewish nation, gathered, men, women, and children, and it is taking place in the Beis HaMikdash, and sees all of this. Definitely, this has an impact on the child. And this will what lead the child to? This will lead him to Yirah Shamayim, no question about it. However, besides that, mitzat, from the point of view of the king who is instructing everybody to come, what is the reason why? Something additional, in other words. Children that are also going to be coming, those that bring them, meaning their parents, will have additional reward. So in other words, there is the inyan mitzad itself, what Hakel promotes to the child. There is also something additional that the parents that bring the children, besides the fact that bringing the children to Hakel adds Yirah Shamayim, God-fearing, to the child, the parents also get a special reward which comes from the side of the king. In other words, from the king who is proclaiming that everyone come and participate in Hakel. So there's also something additional to the parents, that when they will bring their children, they should know that they will get an extra reward. They will get extra schar lemiviyayim for bringing the children. Regarding Pirkei Avos, the Rebbe today spoke in continuation to a question which he raised last week. Pirkei Avos is recited from Pesach till Shavuos by all communities, and the Alter Rebbe writes in the Siddur, Yesh Noyagin, there are those that have a custom to recite Pirkei Avos every Shabbos from Pesach until Rosh Hashanah. So when it comes the later weeks, the weeks that are closer to Rosh Hashanah, in order that we should finish Pirkei Avos on the last Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah, so sometimes it is necessary to recite not only one Perek, but even two Prakim as well. Same was last week, and same this week. Last week we recited Perek 3 and 4, chapters 3 and 4, and today it is 5 and 6, and with the 6th Perek we are completing Pirkei Avos. Before each Perek that we recite, we always say the quotation of Kol Yisrael Yesh Lam Chelik Leilam Haba, that every Jew has his share in Olam Haba. When we finish Pirkei Avos, we always conclude with a quotation of Reb Chananya ben Akashya. What does he say? Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakas es Yisrael, that the Rebishter wants to merit Eden, and therefore he gave us an abundance of Torah and mitzvahs. He gave us that many mitzvahs and Torah, because the Rebishter wants to kind of like merit us, purify us. Lezakas es Yisrael. So the Rebbe asked, when we recite two prakim, does it mean that at the beginning of and end of each one of them should we say Kol Yisrael and conclude with Reb Chananya ben Akashya? example today, we said Perik 5, Perik Hey, and Perik Vav. So the question arises, we start off Perik Hey, with Kol Yisrael. Should we say the Reb Chananya at the end of Perik Hey and begin with Kol Yisrael again at the beginning of Perik Vav? Or is it sufficient to say Kol Yisrael at the beginning of the 5th Perik and conclude with Reb Chananya ben Akashya at the end of the 6th? And the Rebbe explained it today. Says, raised this question last week, and it seems like that somebody probably wrote to the Rebbe a response on this question. And they wanted to compare it to the Musaf of Yontif. When we say Musaf and Yontif, we recite the korbanos which were brought in the Beis HaMikdash on that specific day. Let us take, for example, Chalamoid Sukkos. When we say Musaf, so we say Uvayoyim Hasheni, first day of Chalamoid. We would say Vayoyim Hasheni, what was the korban? And after listing what was the korban, we say Umin Chasam v'Niskeyam Kemeduba. We know that together with a korban there was also a pouring of wine, additional things that came along with the korban. So we say exactly what else came along with the korban. Then we go ahead and we say on the same day Uvayoyim Hashlishi, Param Hashteyasa, and we again say Umin Chasam v'Niskeyam. So we see that we don't satisfy ourselves with one Umin Chasam v'Niskeyam. So this is an indication that in Pirkei Avos we should do the same. Even though we are saying we're saying both prokim at the same time, still we should start each perik with a Kol Yisrael and conclude each perik with Reb Chananya ben Akash. But it says it is no comparison. We cannot compare it. Why? Why do we say these korbanos on Musaf? Because our sages taught us, Tfilos b'mokem korbanos tiknu. When we daven, it is equivalent as if we would be bringing the korban. Unishalma forim sfaseinu. Our lips are paying like a korban, as if a korban would be brought. Together with the korban, it's not just the korban. There's the pouring of wine, and there's all other details that have to come with it. So when we say Vayoyim Hasheni, the korbanos of the Yom Hasheni, we must say the Min Chasam, because the Mincha, v'Niskeyim Kimduba, the pouring of the wine, that's part of the korban. Then we say Vayoyim Hashlishi, so we have to say the Min Chasam v'Niskeyim again, because the pouring of the wine and everything else, all the other accessories that came along with it, is again part of the korban. So we can't say the korbanos without the pouring of the wine, it would be like a half a korban. And being that what we want to do is accomplish unishalma forums faseinu, so we have to say everything that came along with the korban. However, what is about Pirkei Avos? This is, why do we say Kol Yisrael at the beginning of each perek? Rabbi says he looked in Svarim and searched for the reason why do we recite Kol Yisrael at the beginning of the perek, and he found we are getting involved into Pirkei Avos. So before we say Pirkei Avos, and in Pirkei Avos we discuss such wonderful things, what a person should do. So one may say, if that person who does not live up to the standard of Pirkei Avos, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I want to stay away from it. What should I have to do with that person? That person is not befitting to be my friend. The Rebbe elaborated on this. The Rebbe says, there's a simple Jew, a simple person, who means well, and has the best intentions. However, he cannot live up with the standards of Pirkei Avos. And this person is sitting next to a big Talmud Chochem, and this big Talmud Chochem is looking down at this individual. And you know what this individual does? They are sitting together at Chassidische Farbrengen. So the individual, who's the simple Jew, goes ahead and says l'chaim to this big Talmud Chacham, and he's still expecting that the big Talmud Chacham should respond to him l'chaim u'levracha. But it's not befitting for the big Talmud Chacham to have anything to do with this Ish Poshet, with this simple Jew. So what do we say before Pirkei Avos? You should know something. Kol Yisrael, each and every Jew, regardless of whatever situation he's in, Yesh lo chelik lo'olam haba, has his share in the world to come. More than that, not only this, but we also add on, Neitzer matoi, Mainse yodai lehispoer, that each and every Jew is a branch of my planting, of the Rebishter's planting. He's the work of his hands, which he takes pride in. On the contrary, the Rebbe says, it is the other person who is the big Talmud Chacham, and he is looking down at this Jew who is a simple Jew, and for whatever reason he wasn't fortunate of being learned in Torah. That's why he's not well versed and cannot keep up with all of this. He says, but this person who's looking down at him, he's a Balgaiva. And regarding the Balgaiva, what does the Gemara tell us? That the Rebishter says, Ein ani v'hu yecholim lado, that me and him cannot live together. So why do we say Pirkei Avos, before we begin saying Pirkei Avos, we express the mission of Kol Yisrael? This is to proclaim how each and every Jew, regarding of what madregi he is on, we should know that there's a share for Olam Haba on him, and he's the work of the Rebishter, and the Rebishter takes pride in. This is the reason for saying Kol Yisrael at the beginning of the prayer. Why do we conclude with Rab Chananya ben Akashi? Because there's a reason for that as well. What is the contents of the saying of the quotation of Rab Chananya ben Akashi? Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakrus es Yisrael, that the Rebishter wants a merit, and that's why he's giving us Torah mitzvahs in an abundant measure. How does this fit in here to Pirkei Avos? Very simple. We've just learned Pirkei Avos, and Pirkei Avos is telling us so many additional things. Mila de Chasiduse. What is Pirkei Avos? It's advice, acts of Chasidus. In other words, beyond the call of duty. There are so many mitzvahs which we are obligated to do. And above that we are told that there's many other things which are discussed here in Pirkei Avos which are also advisable to do. So a person may think, oy vey, so much to do. There's all the mitzvahs, and besides all the mitzvahs we are learning in Pirkei Avos more things which we are to do. So the Tana is telling us, you should know. Rotza HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakrus es Yisrael. Why does the Rebishter give us such an abundance of Torah and mitzvahs? It's because the Rebishter wants to merit us. It's the Rebishter's interest in us, that he wants to do. He's looking for our good. That is why he's giving us so many hirba lahem. He's adding on Torah and mitzvahs. This is in general why we begin Pirkei Avos with Kol Yisrael and why we conclude with Rab Chananya ben Akash. Now, this week in particular, we are saying Perik 5 and Perik 6, the 5th and the 6th chapters. The truth is that the first 5 chapters, that is Pirkei Avos. The 6th chapter is really not Pirkei Avos. And as it begins with the words, Shonu Chachamim, the Chachamim have learned, Bilshoin HaMishneh. It's something which our sages have taught us in the language of Mishnah, but it really is not Mishnah. What is it? It's a Baraisa. The Rebbe says, when we learn Torah, it is advisable to know what parts of Torah we learning. True, everything is Taka Torah. But on the other hand, the person is supposed to know what is a Mishnah, what is a Gemara, what is a Baraisa, and when he's learning Svarim from the Giyonim, and later down, and so forth. Many quotations of the Tanoim were entered into Mishnah. There are quotations from Tanoim that are not in Mishnah, but are in Baraisa. And there are quotations from Tanoim that are neither and are mentioned in Gemara. So when we learn something, we want to know what are we learning. Right here we are learning a Perik, the 6th Perik, which is Shonu Chachamim. The Chachamim have taught us that. Our sages taught us this. Bilshoin HaMishneh. It's in the same language as Mishnah. In other words, the same setup like a Mishnah, but really it's not Mishnah. Really it's a Baraisa. The Rebbe mentioned that once there was an attitude amongst Chassidim, that when Chassidim would learn Mamorim and Chassidus, and a Chassid would ask, whose Maimer am I learning? Is this a Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, or is this a Maimer from the Mittler Rebbe? Especially in those days when they were learning from manuscripts, they didn't have as many printed Svarim as we have today, so they had manuscripts, handwritten Mamorim. So a Chassid would want to know, am I learning the Alter Rebbe's Maimer? Is he learning the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer? Is he learning the Tzemach Tzedek's Maimer? So there were others that would criticize it. What difference is it whose Maimer you are learning? Just by merely raising such a question, there's a Chassidish expression in Nifrad. Nifrad means one who is apart, one who is not associated. By raising this question, a Nifrad is usually used on a Chassid who is not dedicated to his Rebbe, is described as a Nifrad. He's separated. So Chassidim would criticize the one who's inquiring, whose Maimer he's learning, that he's a Nifrad. What difference to you is it whose Maimer you are learning? You are learning Divrei Elokim Chayim, you are learning the words of Chassidus. Is it a difference if these words are the Alter Rebbe's or these words are the Mittler Rebbe's? What difference does it make to you? As long as you are comforted by the fact that you are learning Chassidus. This was once such an attitude. Rebbe says, however, the Frierdiker Rebbe has instructed us that when we learn a Maimer, we have to know whose Maimer we are learning. It adds to the learning. Know which Rebbe said the Maimer, and at times it's also important when the Maimer was said. That's why you'll notice at the heading of every Maimer there's always a date when the Maimer was said. And sometimes it is also mentioned where the Maimer was said, if it was said in different cities or in different countries by previous Rabbeim that used to do traveling. It is all mentioned right away at the beginning of the Maimer. Why? Because it's important to know these surrounding details are also meaningful. Getting back here to our Indian, it's important to know what is Mishnah and what is Baraisa. And here we have Shanu Chachamim Bilshain HaMishnah, to know that it's set up like a Mishnah, in the same language as Mishnah, but it really is not Mishnah. So when we are saying the 5th Perik and the 6th Perik together, the Rebbe says here it's appropriate to say Reb Chananya ben Akasha in between. Why? To show an indication that this is Mishnah, and this is only the 6th Perik which we are entering is only Bilshaina Mishnah, but really it's a Baraisa. So today, this week, Rebbe says it's definite that we should say the Reb Chananya ben Akasha in between, and once we say Reb Chananya ben Akasha in between, then before we begin the next Perik, we should begin with Kol Yisrael again. But the Rebbe concluded, once we are doing this, then the Taka should be done in a way that even a week like last week, where we combined chapter 3 and chapter 4, in order not to differentiate, some weeks we will say that when we combine 2 Prokim, we will say Kol Yisrael Reb Chananya ben Akasha again, and some weeks we wouldn't. So whenever we combine 2 Prokim, we Taka should say the Kol Yisrael again and the Reb Chananya ben Akasha again. Going a little deeper in today's Perik, Mishnah here, the 6th Perik, talks about the greatness of Chayr. The Mishnah says, Ein lacha ben chayren, who is really considered a person who is a free man, the one who is occupied b'Talmud Torah. Elamisha isik b'Talmud Torah. And where does the Mishnah derive this from? The Mishnah derives this from a pasuk. A pasuk which talks about the luchos. The luchos which Moshe received from heaven. And there the pasuk uses the expression choros ala luchos. It was engraved on the luchos. So the Mishnah says, al tikra choros, don't read it engraved, but cherus, read it free, meaning anybody that's associated with luchos is Torah. Anybody that's associated with Torah is considered a free person. So there's a question from the Tzemach Tzedek on this Mishnah that it says. Tzemach Tzedek asks, this pasuk is talking about the first luchos. We are learning Torah from the second luchos, because the first luchos were broken when Moshe came down from heaven. So how could we derive the fact that one who learns Torah is considered a free person? And we learn this from a pasuk that has to do with the luchos. This pasuk deals with the first luchos. Now we are learning Torah from the second luchos. First luchos broke. They're no longer in existence. So the Tzemach Tzedek says one word in Hebrew. Ahani. Ahani in Aramaic means it helps. Meaning, even though the first luchos are no longer in existence, but on the other hand, this still, as we will see in a minute, this still left some sort of an impact that has a shaykhs to every Yid that learns Torah. And Memela, when a Yid learns Torah, he's considered a ben chayr and he's considered a free person. This is what the Tzemach Tzedek answers. And the Rebbe also explained that we know that we have Shavuos and we have Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the day that has to do with the second luchos. When did Moshe come back with the second set of luchos? This was on Yom Kippur. However, Shavuos, this was the day of Matan Torah. There's a famous expression, see this, Matan Torah was only once. Matan Torah will not be again. So we see again that we celebrate the day of Matan Torah, and that's called the day of Matan Torah Seinu, even though that was the day of the first luchos. So again we see that though it was the first luchos and the first luchos broke, still this date and this inyan still has a major shaykhs to our constant learning Torah, to the learning of Torah which is taking place after the receiving of the second luchos. Regarding the Shir Yomi, the daily Shir and the Rambam, the halachas of Tumah, purity, pure and impure, and there are halachas which are discussed in the Rambam regarding a suffix tumah, a doubt of impurity. We don't know. We're in doubt. It's a suffix. And then the Rambam portrays different cases whether the suffix, this doubt, has arisen in Reshus HaYochid, or this doubt has arisen in Reshus HaRabim, in a private area, in a private property, or in a public property. And the Rambam gets into all the details of halacha. And the Rambam also mentions in the halacha regarding if an entire tzibur, if an entire community becomes tameh. Now the halacha is, if somebody is not pure as tameh, he's prohibited from entering the Beis HaMikdash. He's prohibited from bringing a korban. And that is why we have Pesach Sheni. The second Pesach is for the one that was not able to bring the first Pesach. He will bring a second Pesach. Why couldn't he bring the first Pesach? Because he was not pure, he was tameh. Now the question arises, let us imagine if all of Klal Yisrael would be tameh when it comes to the first Pesach. So in halach it's discussed. I don't know if it ever happened. Chanukah. Okay. Right? Chanukah, and all of Klal Yisrael with Meir Mesim, and there was a problem. How could they go into the Beis HaMikdash and light the menorah? Right? So the Rambam here tells us, Sherei Tzibur Oisin Pesach Betumah. If the entire tzibur, the entire community will be tameh, they will do Pesach. They will be permitted to enter the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi says there's a lot which can be discussed on the meaning of these halachas, the lumdus of the halachas. But as far as Rabbi uses the expression liyasher hadeyos, there's an expression in the Rambam. Rambam says that mitzvahs are given liyasher hadeyos, to straighten out our minds, our views. So the Rambam, this is an expression of the Rambam in Hilchos Gemura. Rabbi very often quotes this expression, explaining other mitzvahs as well. Rabbi says, what do we derive from this? From here we see the power of a tzibur, the power of a community, which is fantastic. They were tameh, they were impure. And perhaps this impurity was intentional. And nonetheless we say, if we're talking about a community, their power is so strong that a tzibur can be makriv, they call them, even when they are tameh. says, what is this relevant to us today? There's a Gemara regarding Aseres Yemei Tshuva. The 10 days of Tshuva, 10 days of Shana through Yom Kippur. So the Gemara explains that there's a pasuk, Dirshu Hashem bihi motzoi, ka'uhu b'yosei karev. Dirshu Hashem bihi motzoi, to search for the Rebishter. You search for the Rebishter when you can find them. So the Gemara says that all year round, the Rebishter responds to a minyan, to a quorum of 10. However, during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, during the 10 days for Tshuva, the response to an individual is equally as the all year round is the response to a minyan. Can be Yachid, can be Tzibur. Aseres Yemei Tshuva, during the 10 days of Tshuva, an individual Jew gets the same response as a quorum does, as a minyan does all year round. So, Rabbi says now that we are about to enter these days, here we see the greatness of a tzibur, the greatness of a community, the power of a community. And here we are talking that each and every Jew comes these days is as powerful as a tzibur. And such strong koiches, such strong strengths were given to a tzibur, and when it comes Aseres Yemei Tshuva, each and every Jew has the same power as a tzibur. This is what the Gemara tells us. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen, because now we are beginning to read by Mincha Hazinu Hashamayim, Pashas Hazinu. Hazinu begins with Hazinu Hashamayim v'sishma ha'oretz. So Rashi and Midrashim will tell us what is the difference between Hazinu and Shmiya. Hazinu means listen. Listen heaven and listen earth. Why when it comes to Shamayim is the expression Hazinu? Why when it comes to Oretz is the expression Shema, Sishma? So Rashi tells us Hazinu is a much stronger listening than Shmiya. And it's a much closer listening. Shmiya is more from the distance than Hazinu. Therefore, Moshe was at a madrege where Shamayim was closer to him than Oretz. Shamayim, always heaven, reflects spiritual inyanim, and Oretz, earth, reflects Gashmistik inyan. What does Moshe say? Ha'azinu Hashamayim. Listen heaven and listen earth. However, heaven is closer to him than earth. Because for heaven he uses the expression Ha'azinu. In fact, there's a very famous medrash which is brought, just looking if Rashi brings it. In Yeshaya there's a similar pasuk in Yeshaya, when there it is on the opposite. Yeshaya said, Hazinu Aretz v'sishma shamayim. So the medrash explains it. Moshe was at a higher madrega than Yeshaya. So therefore Moshe was closer to Shamayim. So Moshe expressed himself regarding Shamayim, Hazinu. However, regarding Oretz, he uses the expression of Shmi, of listening, but he's in a further distance from earth than from heaven, because Moshe is closer to heaven. Rabbi says that Yidden, Chassidim, want to be close to Moshe Rabbeinu, want to be attached to a Moshe Rabbeinu, and there's, as the Zohar says, these Pashtuse de Moshe b'chol dora v'dora, there's a Moshe in each and every generation. So what does the Moshe in every generation demand from us? And demands from every Yid that he should know that Shamayim, Ruchnis Dikinyanim, have to be close to him. Gashmias has to be at a distance. We know that we have to earn a living, and we have to support our families, and everything has to be done in an honest and kosher way. Everything has to be done be'emunah, and so forth. It has to be done. But at the same time, a person has to know that this is not his primary union. What is his main union? What is his primary union? Ruchnius. There's a famous story, the Rebbe didn't mention it, but I think it can be mentioned, b'shaychus to this, that the Rebbe Rashab, Friedeke Rebbe's father, had a chassid. The chassid was a learned chassid, and he knew a lot. He knew Nigla, and he knew Chassidus. was as by Chassidim there's an expression, a tziyur. In other words, he was a personality. And this personality he got him to earn a living, he was involved in the business of rubbers, kalashes. And when he once came to the Rebbe Rashab, the Rebbe Rashab saw how heavily involved he is in his business. The Rebbe Rashab expressed himself, I've seen feet in kalashes, but I never saw a head in kalashes. In other words, he wanted to hint to him that he's overdoing his involvement in his Gashmis the Kinyan. And the same thing, the Rebbe is teaching a Yid who standing to be Mekusha, standing to be tied to the Moshe Rabbeinu of the generation, should follow what Moshe Rabbeinu said. And what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? Ha'azinu ha'shamayim. When it comes to inyanim of shamayim, inyanim ruchniim, this we have to know that this is first and foremost, and this has to be closest to us. And when it comes to inyanim of aretz, we have to do them, and we have to do them properly, and make sure that it's done. No question about it. But a person has to know that this is not his main inyan in life. Taka has to be there, but it has to be in a way of the sishma. It is further, in a further distance than Shamayim. Shamayim is closer to him. It is in the format of Hazinu. However, Oretz, it is Taka there, but in what type of a relation? In the relation of the sishma. A further point, further away from him than Shamayim. A gute Woche, a gut Jahr, und a ksiva v'chsiva